You are listening to the Mountainside Podcast, and joining us in studio for this episode is Dr. Pate. She holds a Ph.D. in Neurophysiology. She specializes in military medical research. She's an educator and advocate for veterans, active military, and first responders. Dr. Pate has dedicated herself to serving those who have served our country at the highest level. She's an amazing young woman. I really enjoyed sitting down with her today. This is an incredible episode, and I encourage you to listen to it in its entirety. Kate. It's great to have you here. I should say Dr. Kate. This is the first time we've met, and shout out to my buddy Jeremiah for teeing it up. Jeremiah Wilbur from War Party Movement, War Party Ranch. Amazing human being.
Yeah.
When he said I should have, when he says you should have this person on, I just say, yeah, are they available next week? Like typically.
Yeah.
But for listeners that don't know you, you're pretty prominent in brain health and especially in the special operations community from what I've gathered. And I have a million questions for you. And I've had a few traumatic brain injuries myself.
Yep.
So I'm sorry if I'm going to dive all over the place. You're going to have to keep me in line.
Hey, I'm used to it. You're in good company.
But just to catch listeners up, let's go ahead and go through a few of your accolades and what you're doing currently to kind of help some former special operations guys, active guys, veterans, that sort of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can kind of give maybe the wave tops that are relevant to the conversation today. The background that I'm bringing to this and the perspective through which I view all of this is my formal educational training and research training, which is in physiology and neuroscience, or put them together, it's neurophysiology. And that's sort of the study of the brain's control of physiology, for example. And my doctoral work was focused on the respiratory system and the brain's control of breathing. But throughout the years, I kind of expanded that into neurotrauma and a ton of different areas of research because of my interests. And so my doctoral training was in neurophysiology, and then I did a postdoc in redox biology, which is studying people may have heard of the term reactive oxygen species and oxidants and antioxidants, and people throw out the term antioxidant all the time when it comes to brain health and brain injuries. And what I was trying to understand is, following traumatic brain injuries, what is happening in the brain with regard to that redox balance, and then what could we do about it with regard to pharmaceuticals or therapeutics to kind of adjust that and maybe promote healing. And then from there, I got into academia as a professor, and I was teaching at a medical school. So my research kind of took a little bit of a pause as I focused on teaching. But that's relevant because that's, I'm an educator at heart. So a lot of what I do today is some people call it coaching, but I hate that word because everybody's a coach these days and something and, completely uncredentialed. But I'm more of an educator in that I try to take these really complex ideas and complex information and educate my friends, right? The people who are suffering from certain things that don't understand what's going on. I try to take what we do know, the science, and be very specific about what we do know. And so I'm not overstating or overclaiming what's out there. I want to be very careful about how I share things and make sure that it is relevant. But I try to break it down in a way that makes sense to people who don't necessarily want to read journal articles all day long. So my training as a medical school professor has helped me in doing what I do today. Fast forward a little bit, I ended up working for a small company as I was still a professor. The small company was an aerospace engineering firm that had applied for a military medical grant on a whim, and they got it, but they didn't have any medical or physiological staff on their entire team. And so once they got this government grant, they didn't really know how to go about performing on it because they didn't have anybody with relevant background. So they hit me up through a mutual friend, and I started helping them. And then on this military medical project, and that was relevant because I come from a military family. I have my brother's dad, uncles, grandfather were all served, and I had a brother who was active duty in special operations as a medic at the time that this was happening. So I saw a really cool way for myself to take my career and apply it to something that could directly benefit humans, and specifically people like my brother and the patients that he was going to be working on the battlefield. So I jumped from academia and teaching. As much as I loved that job, it was like, man, I could really do something cool with my research career and try to do some military medical, combat casualty care research. Can we develop better products for the battlefield? Like, let's try this. And so that was a new area for me. I've always loved trauma medicine, but I had never really never practiced. I wasn't a clinician. I went through a TCCC course once, but, I wasn't a certified EMT at the time. It was just for my own knowledge. But I saw a lot of really hard problems that the military was facing with regard to medicine in austere environments. And I really wanted to try to solve some of these issues, especially traumatic brain injury. That was something that, blast trauma, IEDs, that was something that I was really concerned about of, what do we do if that golden hour disappears and we can't medevac people? What are we going to do with patients who are sitting out there with a brain injury and, no real interventions for, a day to several days? So that kind of was the impetus behind my interest in working in that space. But you know how it is when you get into a space like that, you start meeting people who are on active duty or veterans or first responders, and you start to make friends with people in the space and support each other, and they're interested in what you're doing, and you're interested in what they're doing and helping them out. And I think because a lot of people that I met knew my background in traumatic brain injury and knew that I wasn't associated with a particular branch. I wasn't part of the system. People started coming to me for help because they knew that they were suffering from something, and they had been blown up several times or had some different types of exposures and injuries, but didn't really know what to do about it. And they were worried to go through the traditional channels and end up getting prescribed pills and talk therapy. And they had seen some of their friends go down that path, and it wasn't good. And so they were like, coming to me like, hey, I'm not sure what's going on, but here's kind of what the story is, and what do I do about it? And so I started to try to understand holistically traumatic brain injury, mental health, toxic exposures, chronic stress, all of these different things that my friends were experiencing, and try to understand it and synthesize it, and then share it in a way that painted a holistic picture. So that way my friends could kind of understand it better and then figure out what to do to help themselves. And so I started looking into treatments and what do we know about, what's out there and what's working and what's not. So all of that is kind of the backdrop, and that was sort of what was going on. And during that time, if there was ever a training or something that I could do to further my own education, like a functional medicine training, like certification, or coaching certification in psychedelic medicine, or, something along those lines, I would try to just do it to learn more to be able to help my friends. So I have a lot of different certs and credentials that are kind of relevant to this, but it was really just about gaining the education so I could help my friends with their issues and their stuff. So
that's amazing. You must really love what you do.
I do. I
think
yeah.
Somebody with your accolades and that sort of thing, I would imagine, and this is just me, you could make a lot more money doing something else, probably, right?
Yeah.
Than what you're doing.
No doubt.
Yeah. So I think it's amazing. And knowing a bunch of guys from that community with my background, I'm so fortunate that the time that I spent, a lot of these guys fall into personal protection. Mm-hmm. And I worked for some high profile divas and rock stars and rap stars and stuff. And kind of the position that I was in was dealing with the artist firsthand. So I spent countless hours outside of dressing rooms with security guys, and a lot of these guys being former operators. I've gotten to know a lot of the guys from the community. That's how I know a lot of these former operators and high-level military personnel, and then just amazing people in general.
Yeah.
So that community is just very strong. The friendships, their openness, their their stature, just in being good human beings for the most part. They're all just amazing people.
They are. They put everybody else first.
100%, which is really bad for their own health.
It's very bad for them, but it's something you don't often see in the world.
And they've been through the darkest moments. They've seen the most amount of evil, in my opinion. So they're they're almost like humble or calm to a fault. Even if they are dealing with any sort of pain or injuries, they're the last ones to talk about it with anybody. Like, they're cool. Like, they've seen so many of their friends either die in combat or through suicide. Like, there's so many, what I found is there's so many underlying things that I'm even affected by firsthand, just knowing some of these people and then building these relationships. And you're like, that guy killed himself? Like, what the?
And
like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's unbelievable. And I've lost, it's like at least 1 or 2 or 3 a year, it seems like now. It's just, it blows my mind.
It's an epidemic in and of itself. And that's why I knew how serious it was when people actually did reach out to ask for help. I was like, man, they are in a really bad spot, because they won't ask for help if they can keep moving forward and keep shouldering the stressors and the pain and then, just one foot in front of the other and continue to move forward and push it all down, And so when people were asking me for help, I was like, man, that it has bubbled up at this point to the point where they're worried, and that to me was just scary, because these aren't people who ask for help. And so that was where I was like, I want to do everything I can to understand this and to be a resource, and to, when people do have that courage to ask for help, they're not left feeling deflated of like, oh, see, this is why I don't ask for help, because I didn't get anything, or now I'm worse because I talked to this person who said all this stuff that, isn't helpful. And so I was like, I take that responsibility very seriously. And I care a lot, and I've lost friends to suicide, and it's so painful, and it leaves you with all these questions of what, and again, none of us are responsible for the loss that is out there, that, another person made a decision to take their own life, but it doesn't change how much it hurts and the questions that still pop up. And, I believe that, we need to do whatever we can that's in our control to help each other as much as we can. And some things are out of our control, but when we have the ability to help and to support one another, I feel like we need to. I mean, we're communal creatures. We're not meant to put the weight of the world on our shoulders and to move through the world alone with that kind of weight. We're supposed to be sharing that. And it takes one person to be vulnerable and open up, and then all of a sudden you see, and I see it in the nonprofit space when I work with like these small group retreats where one person opens up and is vulnerable and shares the struggles that they're dealing with, and everybody else is like, oh, okay, I feel okay to talk about this now.
They're not on an island.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think another thing that I've noticed just from an outside perspective being a lot of times when I'm around these guys, we're at public events or public settings and people know their background and they've kind of become rock stars in their own right, and they absolutely should be. But a lot of people are looking to them. Like, if I think of the strongest people I know out of like UFC fighters that I've had in here, pro football players, like just run the gamut on ultra runners, all that sort of stuff. And this is no discredit to any of them. The strongest people that I look to for advice, mentorship, how they carry themselves. And this is all dependent on whether you're a good person or not.
Yeah,
but like
for sure.
90% of the people that come in here are just amazing people. And I really try to vet them before they come in. But looking to those guys are like, I'm just, I look up to them, right? Like I think what they've done, what they've been through, how they carry themselves, outside of their military career and what they're doing now is amazing in so many different ways, right? And even guys that I know that are still active or still involved with some sort of training or something like that. So I know that stigma is around them, especially if they have any sort of platform or podcast or book or anything like that, right? So it's like they can never really relax and let their guard down unless they're in like a personal, intimate setting. But then you start looking like they're all individuals too. Now that I know so many, like people deal with different problems, whether it's relationships, kids, addiction, like there's so many, they're just people when it comes right down to it. And there's so many different variables, right? Like how are you kind of assessing some of those different variables? Is it just through talking with them? And then I guess where does the science come in and how do you start to diagnose something or try to help?
Yeah, I mean that's the tricky part, and that's why it is a challenging thing when dealing with humans because we are all unique and different. And so what I try to do is just listen to people, and if somebody comes my way and they're in need of something, usually you can, as you're listening to them, kind of tease out what the priorities are, or where their real pain points are. And I just try to meet people where they're at and understand who is this unique person in front of me? What are their biggest concerns? What are their biggest goals? And then also what's actually happening for them? What have they been through? And what do I need to know to make sense of this person as a whole? And then, I don't ever diagnose. I'm not a clinician, so I can't actually diagnose anybody. I can't treat anybody, but I try to educate. So I hear what they're saying, and then I try to sort of mirror back what they're saying, infused with the science of with regard to traumatic brain injury. If I know they've had exposures and they're dealing with all these mental health issues or sleep disturbances or whatever, I can kind of take that and say, given your background and what I'm hearing, it sounds like this is going on, and you should know that here's what we know about the science. Like, understand, please, that all of this makes sense. Like, what you're going through, you're not crazy. You're not the only person who's ever gone through this. Like, this absolutely makes sense given what you're telling me, and here's why, and here's what you can do about it. And so I just try to connect the dots for each individual person. But man, I'll tell you what, every time I have these conversations, people are so hesitant to talk about this stuff, and they truly feel like they're the only broken one out there. They feel like they're the only one who's telling you these horrible stories. I mean, the things that really stick with people, and first responders have this too, where it's like that one bad call or those couple bad calls where they just can't shake it, or that one bad shoot, or those experiences where it just is like burned into your memory, and it kind of haunts you even though time goes by. People share these really difficult things that they struggle with, whether it was something that they did that they regret, or whatever that is, and they're like, I'm the worst, I'm the most broken, I'm the thing. And I'm like, if I could just show you all of the conversation, like hold up and show you all these different conversations that I've had with all these individuals, you're all saying the same thing, and you guys are like, we're all in this together. Even if, it's somebody who hasn't been in the military or in the first responder space, like, people have their level or variation or, similar experience to draw on. We're all human. And so the emotions are the same for all of us. It's just a different thing that triggers it for each of us because of our experiences. But that is what unites us. And especially within these communities who have had really unique experiences that not very many humans can say that they've had, there's a lot of similarities there and in what they're sharing. And I wish they knew that. And I wish that they would lean on each other a bit more. But again, it's like,
yeah, when they get around each other, it's kind of just have a good time and block a lot of that out.
Yeah.
And I'm guilty. I'm just as guilty of that. When I'm around them, it's like when you're around your friends, you don't want to be a downer.
Fun.
It's not like everything's a, pity party, right?
No,
those guys are the last to be like a pity party. But
right.
Honestly, where I've gotten it out is here in the podcast studio. Like, I had never, out of all those guys I know, I've never outright asked them about combat story. I just don't bring it up, right? Because I feel like that there's so much more to them as an individual or a business person, or what they've learned in finance, or what they're doing to build a brand. And these guys are so talented in so many different ways. And the drive and discipline is so great in that. I think that's why they find a lot of success in what they do. So I guess I never have focused, because I don't feel comfortable. I wouldn't want somebody asking me hey, what was the worst part of your life?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I've kind of made that connection where I think a lot of times people don't. As soon as they hear that they're a Navy SEAL, one of those first questions might be, well, how many firefights have you been in? Or
which they hate.
Tell me a crazy story, or right? So I've never done that, but they have naturally come up in conversation just because we're talking about something, or we have them in here, and incredible from first responders, because we have a lot of first responders on too. I hope Graham doesn't mind me bringing this up, but we just had Graham Dune in. He wrote an amazing book, and I think what he wrote in his book, it's called The Jagged Blue Line. He was a SWAT member in I shouldn't even say, he was a SWAT member in Colorado of 8 years, sergeant in police. Like the amount of shit that this guy has seen is unbelievable if you read his book, right?
Imagine,
like on crazy stuff. But when he was in here and something that he didn't write about, we were just naturally having a conversation about law enforcement and what guys go through and that sort of thing. And he's like, you know, the first time that I actually pulled the trigger and ended somebody's life, I thought I was supposed to feel different than I did. And like, he started feeling guilty about like the way that he felt, right?
Yeah,
so like
right.
just his journey through that. But I think that like podcasts and stuff have helped so many people share those moments or maybe listen in, and like that does help relate. But how, I guess going into those conversations and like how do you tread in those conversations? Is it because they're coming to you for help? You can start, you can start a little bit different, right?
You can, but I don't, I don't really ask any of those kinds of questions. They just, they volunteer that information.
They naturally need to come up, right?
Yeah. And I, to your point about, when you guys get together and hang out, like it should be fun, right? Like you should be able to, have a good time and bullshit and not go to these, these intense, like there's a weird phenomenon, this weird thing going on right now with like healing culture. It's like everybody's healing 24/7 and it's always about the healing, and it's like this
I'm kind of sick of it, to be honest with you.
And it's unhealthy because it keeps you stuck in focusing on where you're having a hard time. I
feel bad. I don't mean to interrupt you. I feel bad for the guys that build their platforms on self-help because then they're just stuck.
They're stuck
with it, right? And this is one of my questions for you too. You're dealing with a lot of baggage yourself. How do you manage yourself and know like?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the same thing like that I do with the guys, and I think that there is a time that the time is right to unpack some things. You know that you're in a safe environment and that your goal in that moment is to kind of work through some stuff. It shouldn't be that every moment of every day is spent, quote unquote, growing intentionally and working through your stuff and consciously healing all the time, because it keeps you stuck in that stuff. It keeps you stuck in the past. It keeps you stuck in these places of darkness and grief and looking backwards instead of being present in the present moment. And that I think is a problem that I'm seeing with like social media healing culture, is just like everybody's broken and fucked up and we all need to do all of these things to be perfect and healed and whole. And
there's
it's like,
so many things
this is a lifelong journey for all of us. Like,
right.
I have really painful, traumatic experiences that are always going to be a part of my life. And when I allow myself to go to those places, I'm going to feel grief. I'm going to feel pain and sadness. Like, I don't think that's ever going to go away. But is it affecting my present moment every day of my life anymore? No. And that's where if you're around friends and you're feeling joy and happiness and you're laughing, like, yeah, you might have had a horrible experience the day before, but if you're in the present moment and you're able to feel that, let yourself feel it. Don't be like, well, I had this really rough thing happen yesterday. If it's genuinely affecting you, that's a totally different thing. But if you can find those moments of joy, that's why I think that these communities are so great for all the dark humor, because in the midst of like,
it's the best.
In the midst of that gritty, dark pain and awfulness of the reality of life, sometimes you can find those little moments of humor. And thank God, right? Like, laugh. And it is sometimes like pretty messed up what you're laughing about. But
right.
but if you're able to share that, like that's the stuff that I'm talking about. It's like there's a time when, for me, for example, I'll use myself. If I'm noticing that there's something that from my past it keeps bubbling up and it's conscious, it's like taking up a lot of bandwidth and it's not allowing me to be present with people. Or to focus on work or whatever, I will set aside time, whether it's with my therapist or alone or with a spiritual guide or however that needs to show up in that moment. for that particular scenario, I'll intentionally go do something about that to offload it and work through it. It's like something is nagging at me. It's asking for my attention. I need to try to see what's here. And I'll do some work on it, and then I try to put it to bed for a little while, and journaling and whatever that process looks like. I'm a nature person, so I do a lot of processing on trail runs and mountain biking and hiking, and so journaling is helpful for me, but I like mentally journal in nature. So I don't put music in, and I don't use earbuds. I just go out and I'm like,
it's been a saving grace for me. Like if I am having a problem, all I have to do is go get on one of these trails.
Yeah.
I don't even have to run. Just take
exactly.
the dog,
exactly.
walk, think about it. And by the end of it, I'm pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. And that to me is like, that's an intentionally directed action towards dealing with these things that are bubbling up. When I'm not being nagged by stuff in my past, I'm able to be present and focus on helping others. And that to me is sort of like an indication of, hey, you're in a good place. Like, keep doing what you're doing, and when that stuff bubbles up, you deal with it. You focus on it. You take time for yourself. You don't keep pushing it down. Because I think what I grew up learning how to do, and what a lot of people in the community do, is these uncomfortable emotions bubble up, and we weren't taught how to deal with them or what to do. We didn't have good models for that, and most people don't. And so you just push it down because you're like, I don't like that feeling. That doesn't. Even joy sometimes for people was like a bad emotion, because when they expressed it, they were berated for it or were told it was inappropriate. And so even good emotions, or what we call good emotions, for some people, they feel it and they push those down too. And so for some people, it's just there's an emotional response and there's an immediate suppression, and they just kind of try to keep going out throughout their day. But what I try to say is, like, when you have these things bubble up, if there's something there that's pretty persistent, or it's just kind of keeps coming back, there's information there for you, and maybe set aside some time to deal with that, and then let it go so you can be present with those in your life and you can focus on work. And so it's kind of this constant ebb and flow that never ends.
You got to help yourself before you can be there for anybody else.
1,000%.
Right?
Yeah. And that's the hard part with these communities, because
they're so selfless.
They are, and it is to a detriment, because they don't take care of themselves and will continue to burn the candle and support other people as much as possible until they're running on empty and they're physiologically falling apart. And that is this allostatic overload term, or operator syndrome. Those are that's the burnout point. And at that point, your body's going to force you to deal with it. You're not going to be able to function, and you don't want it to get to that point. But they will always put their families and their friends and their jobs and mission and teammates and all of that ahead of their own needs. And part of it is who they are and how they grew up and what shaped them into being a person who would want to pursue a career like this. But then it's reinforced in the training that they get. And they're taught that as well. So they're taking this natural tendency that they have and sort of not exploiting it, but reinforcing it for a career that requires it. And thank God for people like that. But also, we've got to take better care of them, And
I don't think that this is just something that pertains to if you were in special operations, or if you served in the military, or if you're a first responder.
Right.
I think normal people deal with this in their life, whether they're in a corporate environment, whether they have a podcast, if they're just a stay-at-home mom.
Men and women both,
men and women both, all walks of life, including kids. Like, I've seen, if kids start performing at any sort of a high level, there's a level of stress that comes along with that. And I'm just speaking from my own experience and being a father. Mm-hmm. So I think that this applies to anybody and everybody, what we're talking about today too.
It does, absolutely.
Which is crazy.
It's a human problem.
It really is a human problem. We're so crazy. It's unbelievable to me. Like, I still question it every day. I bounce back and forth between faith and like just all these different questions, because I'm such a nature person, right? And how I was raised and my background. But I guess to dive into a little bit of the science. So, like, you and I were just talking about using nature for therapy. Like, I never feel better and more appreciative and grateful than when I come back from a backcountry elk hunting trip, right? Where I've been out like suffering, like the entire day pretty much sucks, but you love it. It's like a good type of suck, right? Like, you know, you're a hunter as well, right? I've seen some of your photos of you packing elk, and, which is badass. But like what I get out of that is when I come home, it's like that first shower that you take in your own shower with your own soap, and like,
little
God,
things.
it makes you appreciate it, right?
Yeah.
Like sleeping in your bed and not waking up, or waking up to walk to the bathroom and it's warm, right? You have to go. That's my biggest thing. I hate laying in the bag. So like those little moments of suck really help me. But even just going on a walk, to get into some of the science that's behind that and some of the stuff that I've adopted, and I'm a huge fan, and I'm curious to see how you feel about this person. But Andrew Huberman I've learned so much through Huberman Labs podcast, him going on other people's podcasts, that I've applied in my own life. And I'm like, this does make a difference.
Yeah. Like
to the point, before I do have caffeine or anything, I'm going outside, I'm getting in the sunlight, I'm just going on a 20-minute walk. I'm just getting the day started that way. Like there's little things that I have to check and balance that makes a huge difference. And I do notice it because I still work in the entertainment industry here and there. When I go to like Vegas or something, you're in a casino, you're always inside. And the next thing you know, you're walking the convention center floor if you were at SHOT Show or whatever, right? And it's like, you don't realize it, but now you've been inside for 48 hours and you start to feel like shit. You know, it's like, it's hard to literally go outside in Vegas.
Yeah,
right?
you have no idea what time it is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and they design it like that for a reason.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, you know, just little things of just cutting back on alcohol and noticing how that affects sleep, and actually tracking your sleep, and like those little micro changes have made so many adjustments in my life to just how I feel, that now I really notice them. Kind of like when I'm in the backcountry and I come home and take a shower for the first day, when I don't do those things, I'm like, wow, I just got pissed off because I probably didn't have sunlight this morning or something. You know what I mean? It's
right.
Those little things you don't notice. So to get into the science of kind of like going into nature, like how, I don't know how to break it down or how to start there, but I recommend that to so many people, especially my friends that may reach out to me and be like, yeah, I just had a huge blowout with my wife. I'm fucking done. I'm ready. I'm like, dude, go for a 20-minute walk. Go by yourself.
Yep.
If you want me to go with you, I will, but like just go and then figure some shit out for a minute with yourself. You know?
Totally. I mean, I always tell people that spending time in nature is the easiest, cheapest thing we can all do. And there's reasons why you feel better coming back from a hunt. And it relates to these simple little things that you were talking about. Like we've adapted to living indoors. We've adapted to this technology, and, you know, people say like, oh, we weren't built for this. And I would argue like, sure, originally humans didn't evolve with these things, but like we have them now and we're adapting to them. So is it healthy for us? Probably not. But I mean, it doesn't mean we're not adapting. We certainly can adapt to all kinds of situations. So we're adapting to the world that we live in today. It brings many challenges, though. So like spending too much time indoors, staring at a screen, your circadian rhythm is off, we're eating processed foods, you know, all of those things. But when you spend time outside, there's a lot of things that are going on. You're getting natural sunlight exposure, which, as you know, as a fan of Huberman, you know why that's important. It helps keep your circadian rhythm on track, and among many things. But when you're also outside, you're in contact with nature, with dirt, most likely. There's a lot of really beneficial bacteria in the soil that we co-evolved with that are really critical for colonizing our skin and our gut microbiome. And if we are, and this is that there's a lot of research around this about hand sanitizers and antibiotics, and, you know, you kill off all of these beneficial bacteria, it's at a detriment to the body. And these bacteria that are found in the soil and that, you know, colonize animal hides and things like that you touch when you hunt, these bacteria interact with our immune system in a way to promote an anti-inflammatory state and keep us healthy. So if you kill off these healthy bacteria, you're going to have pro-inflammatory reactions in the body. The immune system's going to be more leaning towards an inflammatory state. And inflammation, we know, affects all kinds of things with regard to health negatively and contributes to disease progression. But at the very practical end of the spectrum, mental health. Anytime you have neuroinflammation or brain, inflammation that reaches the brain and the central nervous system, it's going to either potentially cause or certainly exacerbate any mental health condition. We know from the literature that anxiety disorders and depression have underlying neuroinflammation going on. So these processes will get worse if you kill off these healthy bacteria, and that will maybe exacerbate these mental health conditions. We can talk about inflammation in the brain with TBI, in a little bit, but the bacteria is another part. We're also, when we're outside, we're not staring at a phone. We're not staring at screens. We're likely moving. I mean, sometimes if you're spotting or whatever, you're seated, but most of the time in nature, you're moving. You're not sitting at a desk all hunched over. That movement is really beneficial as well. Typically, if we're doing it solo, that's, sometimes that quiet time is really important for us. But a lot of times you're with a buddy, or maybe you're at hunt camp, or, you're just, maybe it's not hunting, but you're just outside, camping with friends. You're spending time being social and interacting with other people. All of these things are critical for health. And when you're inside and you're focused on work and you're eating terrible food and, full of antibiotics and hand sanitizers and all of that. I mean, you're throwing your physiology off. And that's a very simple thing, to just continue to spend time in nature on a regular basis, where you can kind of hit the low-hanging fruit, as I call it. There's a lot of things that we should all be doing on a daily basis that nobody wants to do, because it doesn't, in that moment, it's not like a silver bullet that all of a sudden they feel 100% better. And so people right now are looking for the thing that's going to make them feel better right now in this moment. And these are things that'll make you feel better a little bit in the moment, but mostly over time as part of a disciplined, regular practice. But a lot of people don't, want to do it. They're like, well, is there a pill? Can I just take a pill and feel better? And it's like, well, You can eat right. You can get good sleep. You can cut the alcohol out. You can do all these things. And I guarantee you're going to feel better, but it might take a little time.
I think just feeling better in your own body. Like if you have joint pain or anything like that, that translates to kind of being just mentally miserable. Like you can't be in a good state. Like there's certain things that I have kind of a checklist that I like to do before I come in and do a podcast to put myself in the right state to sit here and give 100% to the conversation. One is workout, which I didn't do this morning.
It was early.
Go for a walk, get out in the sunlight. I did do that this morning. That's like, I have I guess kind of stages to it, but that makes such a huge difference in just how I feel in throughout my day. Right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's been a really easy hack for me, because it doesn't take long. I mean, even if I'm outside for 10 minutes,
it helps. Say
I don't have that 20 minutes. Yeah. I can find 10 minutes. I can find 2 minutes, as long as I just go do it. Right. One of the things, I'm not sure. I think you guys might know each other. Ben, oh my God, why am I forgetting Ben's last name? Ben Davis.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Ben?
I do.
Okay, cool. Ben's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
Through a nonprofit.
Cool.
Shout out to Parker's Platoon. Amazing nonprofit
Yeah.
That's helping some veterans out in many different ways.
Right.
But yeah, Ben Davis is it Vogue? Okay. So this is one thing that some of these groups have realized how much therapy they're actually getting by getting off of SSRIs or whatever prescriptions and replacing that with nature therapy, that these guys are advocating in Congress and all over the place, and specifically to the VA, right?
Yeah.
To use nature as almost like a therapy, or to be funded or be able to be prescribed by the VA as an alternative medicine. Or I guess, would that be a nutraceutical? Or is that like...
It's more of like a protocol. And believe it or not, there's actually a decent amount of literature already on what you would call, quote unquote, nature therapy or outdoor adventure therapy. There's a lot of different terms that people use. And so it's not specifically defined. And that's part of the reason why it can't be like prescribed yet because all of the studies around it, they've done it slightly differently. And so there's no like consensus as to like, it needs to be this kind of nature.
There's so many
for this
variables
time.
too. Like, are you on a snowmobile or are you archery hunting or like, skydiving? What is it?
Yeah. But I think the power behind that though, is that almost all of these studies have shown benefit. So it clearly is about doing these things with friends, outside, moving your body. Like these are all kind of components of the different, quote unquote therapy techniques. But the VA is in support of this. And the VA actually, I don't know if they funded the study or if it was just published by the VA, but there is a study that the VA has looked into on this for veterans. And I wrote an article for Havoc Journal on nature therapy and hunting and how that benefits the health of the veteran community. So there's a lot of studies that are in that article that kind of point to what other people have done and why it's potentially beneficial. And again, it's not rocket science, right? It's just like...
It's free. Most of the time
most of the time it's free. But even, for people who live in urban environments, I lived in Boston for, the past 7 months and then before moving back here, thank God.
You didn't come back with an accent.
No, but a lot of people were worried.
Tougher though, right?
Yeah. But even there was like a little neighborhood park. It's a concrete jungle, but there's parks everywhere. So even if you can go to the park, check the grass before you take your shoes off, make sure there's no dog poop or goose poop. But put your feet on the grass or the soil. Just sit on a park bench and breathe, and don't look directly at the sun, but look kind of like close, in that direction. There's things that you can do to connect with the natural world, and that kind of more primal part of yourself too, to remember that yes, you're a human being and certainly have a higher consciousness and spirituality, I believe, but we're also part of nature and the earthly creation here.
Well, I think you can find nature anywhere, right? Like it doesn't matter what city, what desert, what wherever you're at.
Looks different.
Being outside.
Yeah, it just looks different. It's desert or city or a forest or a mountain or a beach. It's you can find nature. So for people who are like, oh, but we don't live in Evergreen or Golden and we can't do what you guys do, it's like, well, that's okay. There's plenty that you can do in your own way.
Boston's got a beautiful the river that's right there.
Yeah, the Charles.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Amazing
really pretty.
People running up and down that. Sometimes that can be nature, just being out around other people, especially if you're in any sort of fitness community. Like eye candy is always good, right?
Yeah,
it's good for the brain.
It is, yeah. Keeps you motivated. Yep.
Yeah. No, I guess I don't even know where to start. I have so many questions for you.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to dive into right away, because I know so many people that are affected by this, whether they're professional fighters, have been in a snowmobile accident, have fallen off a cliff, whatever, rock climbers. TBI is a big thing, right? It's not just in military guys, and military guys are more susceptible to it because of, one of my friends, for example, never wounded in combat, but has breached so many doors that he had some serious brain stuff going on to the point where it was functioning. He had trouble functioning physically, right?
Yeah.
And thank God he's on the up and up on that.
That's
he's
good.
kind of figured what works for him through diet and other therapies and stuff like that. But TBI, how do you kind of diagnose if it is affecting you, if you've had it? Because a lot of times you don't realize that you've had a traumatic brain injury until you can't read a book or whatever starts happening, right?
Yeah.
There's so many variables to it.
Right. Yeah. And everybody responds differently. So I've had a number of concussions myself, and, I can kind of think back and remember what happened and how I was feeling prior versus after. And you can notice some things that are off, but a lot of times, like you said, for people who especially grew up in a time when it was sort of like,
the 80s kids,
you just get up, dust yourself off and keep going. Maybe drink some water and take a knee and then keep going. But there was no talk about concussion and brain injury. It was like, well, you didn't pass out, so it must not be a concussion.
And there was no protocols either
there's
to
still barely not. Yeah. There's still we still don't have it down to a completely detailed fine science. And so I would say for people who have hit their heads pretty hard, who have maybe felt off afterwards, I think a lot of the pretty clear signs after, not losing consciousness, that isn't a good indicator. But you can have different types of symptoms in the immediate aftermath. I think the biggest one is like significant fatigue, where you're just exhausted. You want to sleep constantly, or you try to move, and when you do, you're like gassed immediately, where you just can't, like you try to do some cardio or to lift, but I think cardio is the pretty strong indicator, and you're just suffering. You just can't. And I would say if that's happening and you are tired, let yourself rest. Do not push through a workout when you're like suffering really bad and you just can't move right. It's like, just give yourself some time to rest. Memory for sure. Memory can be an issue around the event, but you can have issues with memory in the aftermath. So if that comes up, you can certainly.
That's my problem.
I know. Yeah, I get it, man. Yeah. And concentration too. So for example, like I had a really gnarly concussion. I was mountain biking in New Zealand, and it was really wet, and my front tire washed out on mud, and before I even knew it was happening, I face planted right into a tree stump, and I put my teeth through the bottom of my lip, smashed my face because I was wearing like just a half shell, not a full face, smashed my whole lower face, and just was like out. And I wasn't out long, but when I woke up, I was just gushing blood, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just put my face into this tree. Wow. And I immediately
Were
was
you by
like,
yourself?
At the time, yes, my friends were down.
My
friends were down below. They're much faster than me, and so I walked my bike out of the woods. And when I came out of the woods, they were like horrified by what they saw, and they took me to the emergency room. And they sutured up my face and took the tree bark out of my face and like dealt with that. But I remember the aftermath of that, and just being in that state of nausea and extreme fatigue. I would try to like go for a walk the next day and could barely walk. I was so tired. I just was like out of breath immediately. But I was teaching at the time. This was when I was a professor at the medical school, and I had to teach. And I remember getting back, and I didn't take any time off stupidly. I didn't do the things I should have at the time and take care of myself right. Even though I knew better, I was like, oh, I'll be fine. We all do it. So I tried to go back to work, and I'm staring at my lecture and looking at the PowerPoints, and the words don't make sense on the slide. And I'm trying to read it and reread it and reread it. And I remember staring at this paragraph for like an hour, and I couldn't make sense of it. And I kept rereading it, and I was like, this is not okay. This is not good. And that persisted for some time after, and like months after. And it wasn't as bad as it was immediately, but like some of these lingering symptoms can take a long time to go away, or you do still have some memory issues. And, there are some things that can be affected really long term depending on the person. So this is where it gets to be a little tricky, because we don't know, like for each individual, there could be a lot of things going on at the time. Like I might have had a head injury, but maybe I'm still drinking all the time when I go home, or I'm eating terrible food, or I'm smoking cigarettes, or I'm in an environment where I'm exposed to like mold, or I'm in a high stress house where I can't escape the stress of that, or I have a job that's mentally fatiguing and I'm taxed all the time. There's so many different things that are also happening that could be contributing to the symptoms that
so
may not just be
TBI lingering and inflammation and
some other thing. It's not like TBI doesn't happen in a vacuum. We're humans with complex lives. And so I try to caution people to like, yes, there's likely some things happening with lingering issues with a TBI, but don't blame everything on a TBI, because I see that a lot with people who are like, well, I can't remember anything anymore, and I don't, I have all these things, and it's because of my TBI. And I'm like, well, but look at your lifestyle. Like, what are you actually doing to try to help yourself get better? I would argue that, maybe that started from your TBI, but maybe you would have recovered had you done all these other things to take care of yourself. Now I'd say that a lot of your issues are coming from the fact that you're not sleeping, and you're eating fast food every day, and you're drinking a bunch of whiskey every night, and that,
you're sleeping like shit.
Yeah.
There's so many variables.
Right.
I guess so post TBI, like say you're having memory loss. I'm asking for myself personally.
Asking
right
for
now.
a friend.
Yeah. what are some nutraceuticals or some natural things or some natural ways that you can get that back, either through brain exercises? Maybe it's some supplements. Like I recently started taking quercetin at a, like
antioxidant.
yeah, just because I heard that it could help. One of our sponsors is Alpha Brain from On It. Like I'm big on the nootropics. I notice a difference when I'm on them.
Yeah.
So just those little things like that. What are some things to kind of get you back on track, I guess? Or is there anything? Is there any? Yeah,
there's some stuff. I mean, so the reason that we don't have a definitive protocol and a, quote unquote, FDA approved treatment is because a lot of things that have shown promise in animal studies have had inconclusive results in human studies. And that doesn't mean they don't work. It just means that the clinical trials that were run didn't show a robust enough response, or maybe the protocol was different, or there were different protocols that maybe it worked in one study, but it didn't work in this other study because the protocol was slightly different. And so there's a lot of reasons why things fail in human trials that then don't become like a standard of care. But that doesn't mean that they're not beneficial. So for example, with regard to supplements, I'd say most of the supplements are there's some positive data, there's some inconclusive data. So, the FDA is not going to be like, hey, this is an approved treatment strategy for brain injury. But again, like that doesn't mean it's not.
You have to be careful with supplements too, because sometimes a lot of them are snake oil. And that's why any of our sponsors here, like it's products that I use firsthand. And
absolutely, you have to have it third party accredited or tested, so that way.
And don't take my word for it. If you take it and don't feel any sort of difference,
exactly,
don't take it.
It's not worth the money, and that's where if you're taking a supplement, make sure it's third party tested, so that way you know that what you're paying for is what's in the bottle. And not only that it's not contaminated with something really dangerous, because that could also happen too. If it's not that it's just sawdust and it's like harmless. It's like it actually could contain harmful stuff. So you want to make sure if you are taking supplements that you know where it's coming from. But all of that said, I would say that the very first thing that I would often tell people to focus on is high dose fish oil. So that's something, you would probably need somewhere between like 3 and 5 grams daily. So it's a lot. It's certainly like more than you would get taking whatever's recommended on the back of a fish oil supplement bottle. Probably 3 to 5 times as much as is recommended. But that high dose can be helpful. We think because of the repair of membranes. So sometimes when you have traumatic brain injury, you've got these cellular disruptions in cell membranes or lipids. And so these lipids from fish oil can help repair potentially some of the damage. It also appears to be anti-inflammatory. So we think that maybe fish oil is doing things at that level that could help repair and promote health of neural tissue. And that seems to be pretty promising. There's been a lot of positive support for fish oil. So I would say that's something that is really good, and it's relatively harmless. So if you take too much, it's not like it's going to cause any severe side effects.
Fairly inexpensive too. It's not
so you can do that. And then N-acetylcysteine, or NAC, is another antioxidant. It's really important in the glutathione antioxidant pathway and an intracellular antioxidant pathway. So that way cells can kind of take this up and boost their internal glutathione to help buffer reactive oxygen species, essentially. And that helps this antioxidant response can kind of help protect against this massive response of free radicals or oxidants that happens post-injury when you have all this damage and cell disruption. There's a lot of free radicals, which are basically oxidants. It's just an electron bouncing around, essentially, that is damaging the tissue. And
so it kind of captures them?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Essentially, it kind of scavenges these free radicals and kind of matches them pairs them with another electron and makes them non-reactive. So there's different antioxidants that you can take. N-acetylcysteine seems to be a really promising one.
Is that something that you can just get off the shelf?
You can get NAC is the supplement. So that's something that's shown some pretty great promise as well. Creatine is another one that I am a huge proponent of.
Dose-wise, sorry, I'm going to slow you down here for just a minute. Like dose-wise, when we're getting in to the NAC, like what's a recommended dose of that?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and double check. But I would imagine, I think when I was looking up the recommended doses in the studies that I was looking at, it was like double what you would look at on the back of a recommended daily dose.
Okay.
So not quite as high as something like fish oil. You're not doing like 5 times as much as the daily recommendation, but something along those lines, like, as recommended or maybe double.
Okay.
So I can double check and get back to you on that.
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
fine. We might be able to Google it too. Tyler's got access. I didn't tell you before this,
cool.
but yeah.
Okay.
If there's something that we need to look up, you can kind of.
What would we look
Recommended daily dose of NAC.
I might actually have be able to pull it up here. Yeah.
Milligrams.
So for the research for NAC, it was about 1,200 to 2,400 milligrams daily, split into several doses.
Okay. That's good. I hear stuff on podcasts all this time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, if I don't know how much to take, then you go into the vitamin store and it's like, holy shit. Like yesterday I was just looking for, because Jocko Fuel has been such a great sponsor, they sent me a bunch of supplements. So they sent me a fucking lifetime supply of vitamin D, but it didn't have K2 with it. So I was like, oh, I got to have the K2. And I went in to just get K2 and there was like 1,000 different options. I didn't know the dosage. I was like just flying blind in there. So I always like to try to throw that out when we can. So sorry, going back. So NAC, what's the next?
Creatine is also really beneficial.
Yes.
And that's one, especially for women, I feel like women should be taking this every day anyway, period, full stop.
Really?
Yeah. But I think, and actually, Dr. Stacy Sims has a lot of really helpful information. If there are women listening to this podcast or men who have women in their lives who would like to share this information with them, Dr. Stacy Sims has a ton of information on female high-performance athletes and women in general who just want to live a healthy life and, I guess, perform at an optimal level for their age group. And women, we're a lot more, unfortunately, we're a lot more tricky to dial down. So a lot of the protocols, cold plunging, for example, great for men, not great for women. So
really,
yeah, it's too cold. It triggers a different kind of fight or flight response.
Okay,
and it's not.
Pull up this doctor. I'm sorry, who is it? Stacy?
Dr. Stacy Sims.
Okay, is it where would Instagram or?
She has an Instagram, but she
have a podcast?
Yeah, she's got a book called Roar. She has been on Huberman, and that podcast where she's on the Huberman show is excellent.
What's your take on Huberman?
I think he shares a ton of awesome information. I do think, like, for me as a scientist, I love getting down into the weeds and I like hearing the details. But I also can't stand 3-hour podcasts sometimes.
Right. I don't have that sort of time, but like what I love about him is I'm a big dumb Neanderthal and I'll call myself that. So like I love his approach to how he breaks it down so I can understand. Oh yeah, go outside, dummy, or like whatever, right? Like,
well, and thankfully he wrote a book, so that way the protocols, because that was always my biggest gripe. Was
is
like,
the book out?
Not yet. I think it's still pre-released.
Awesome.
But I was like, man, you have so many podcasts. Could you like distill down the takeaways for all of us in these different areas?
Right.
And thankfully he's writing this book. So
yeah. Have you ever thought about starting a podcast or doing a book or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I have. But I feel like
you have to be careful what you commit yourself to. Like, it is a time suck. Like,
it is. And I try to figure out, like, what am I offering that's unique, that hasn't been done? I don't want to just do what everybody else has done or a slightly different flavor.
That's hard too.
Yeah. And so
that's why I didn't go and listen to, you've been on multiple podcasts, but I was like, I feel like sometimes if I go and listen to him, it's not the same conversation, but it's like, oh, I kind of already know that, you know, like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I get it. I get it. Yeah, I don't know. There's so many different directions that I could go in with that, but not yet.
Yeah. All right. So sorry. Back to supplements.
Yeah.
So we were at
creatine.
NAC. Creatine,
and I'd say 5 to 10 grams post concussion, post traumatic brain injury could be sort of the sweet spot. It's kind of what's actually physiologically relevant. So you wouldn't do more than you would normally do for like a daily dose anyway.
There's this big thing going on right now where there's so many different creatines out there.
Yeah.
And like there's creatine wars happening basically between companies. They're like, your creatine's bullshit and mine's the best.
Yeah.
Like,
I just use I use Creapure. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have any. They don't support me. I don't. Whatever. But that's the one that I did a little research on, and I was like, well, this one looks pretty good. But
okay.
Yeah, there's so I mean, there's so many supplements and companies.
It's crazy.
And it's nuts.
It's wild.
Ketones are another one, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so ketones and a ketogenic diet post-concussion can be really beneficial because the problem is post-injury, you've got all of this neuroinflammation and you have what happens in some of these cells when they're damaged is calcium influx, and then it triggers it triggers essentially a free radical production within the cell, but excitotoxicity, meaning that glutamate, this excitatory neurotransmitter, is dumped into the synapses of the brain, which basically makes a lot of neurons start firing. It's excitatory. And so your brain has, in this post-injury phase, it has a really hard time using glucose and oxygen to make fuel or ATP. And that's usually what the brain runs on, but it struggles. It's almost like trying to put diesel in a gas car. And the brain is like, I can't, make energy with what's happening. And so
if you're not checking out the Mountainside podcast on YouTube, you absolutely should be. If you like the content that we create here and you want to help support the podcast, please take a moment, subscribe to us on YouTube, and hit that notification bell.
Ketones are another source of energy that bypass that whole pathway that the brain can use to continue to function. And so this is why whether you do a ketogenic diet or which I think is better, you just take extra ketones through a company that makes ketones. There's several out there, I think, that do that. It gives your brain another source of fuel after the injury. So you're not running at a deficit and causing more issues. So that's something else
awesome.
That
is my, cognitively, when I'm fasted, I feel more cognitively sharp.
Yeah. Definitely.
When I eat, I've pretty much been eating a Paleolithic diet. Some would call it carnivore, but I do mix a little bit of fruit in now and then. But I notice a big difference if I start having any sort of carbs, and breaking it down between rice and starchy stuff like flour or pizza. You might as well give me a hangover if I've had pizza.
Yeah, it probably messes up your gut.
It does. Yeah. Real bad.
Yeah.
But cognitively is the biggest thing that I notice.
Yep.
So man, there's so many different things.
Yeah.
Between sunlight, ice baths. I'm a huge proponent of that. Although I haven't been doing it lately. I've been being a pussy lately.
I mean, it's also been cold here.
Yeah.
So.
It's getting nice
It's
enough.
easy to
I
do in the
almost
summer.
thought about part of the problem is I have a giant ice cube in my garage right now.
Okay.
Because I forgot to drain it before this last freeze.
Yeah.
And it is it's a stock tank.
Yeah.
That is just one giant ice
Just
cube.
go drill a hole out in Evergreen Lake and jump in.
They actually do that. I think, is it New Year's Day where they do the polar plunge or something like that? They do a polar plunge up here.
Cool.
The fire department cuts a hole in the ice and
That's awesome.
everybody comes down. And
Man, I bet that's cool.
yeah.
Yeah, sauna, cold plunge, breath work.
There's so many things to do. If you did that, it's a full-time job. So it's
but you could,
how do you kind
could
of
squeeze in 5-minute stuff throughout the day.
Right.
So for example, I am at my computer far too much. I hate it. I write a lot of grants for work. I have to write reports for the government, for the contracts that we have, and I am just at my computer a ton. Even the coaching calls and stuff that I do with clients, I mean, I'm on Zoom, and so I'm just at my computer. So I'll set an alarm or a timer every 50 minutes, and it's you got to get up for 5 minutes and do something. You walk around the house, you take the dog out, you jump up and down, you do some breath work, whatever it might be, push-ups, you just squeeze things in throughout the day where you can. And I mean, I guess a cold plunge could work if I had one and I could just jump in for 3 minutes or something.
Right.
But you know what I mean? There's ways to kind of get it in, but it does require, I mean, we all have extremely busy lives in the world that we live in today. So it requires really good discipline. And I feel like a lot of people just don't have that kind of discipline, or they have
Me
it with
included, yeah.
I'm myself too.
Yeah.
And it's you have it in certain areas, but not throughout the entirety of your day. It's I'll be very disciplined about this thing, but then the rest of my day
Well, I think that's what I do is I focus on what's most important to me and what I know I get benefits from. And then I suck at a lot of other things too. I was just talking about diet. It doesn't always work out that way. You get busy, you're on the go, you're fucking starving, you're in the middle of, good luck walking into the grocery store and just finding something that you can pick up and
I
eat
know.
that's like
that's actually decent
for you, you know?
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like I always tell people, you have to pick your battles with this stuff, and you never want to overwhelm yourself because then you're just going to give up, and you're like, well, fuck it. It's 5,000 things to micromanage my day.
Right.
And nobody wants that. So that's where I
Even
think
if you only have time to do one thing, if you have 3
Start
minutes,
small.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Start small and build. You might, I always tell people first thing they should do is change up their diet. Easiest thing. And if you don't know what to do, pick a Mediterranean diet and eat that and cut out the alcohol or at least limit it and see how you feel. Just start with that and then do the nature thing. And
I know some people firsthand that struggle with alcohol or use alcohol on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I notice, and this is no knock on anybody, but like one of the things that I notice is they're just like cognitively not as sharp. Like, and over time, if you know anybody that's dealt with alcoholism, it's almost like,
I mean, myself,
Yeah.
I certainly struggled with that for a really long time.
Really?
And and like I can relate to that. And part of it is that it's a toxin and it screws up it's also a sledgehammer to your stress response system. So it basically like hits we call it the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and it causes massive cortisol release and epinephrine. And so your body is stressed and it's a toxin. But then even if you have one beer and it's a couple hours before bedtime, it will fuck up your sleep. And I know people who used to rely on it to sleep because they said it was the only thing that could help them. And maybe some sleep is better than no sleep, but it will disrupt your sleep architecture. So you might be unconscious for 9 hours, but your quality of sleep is so poor that you're going to wake up and you're going to feel horrible. And so that's also the cognitive issues that you see with these people is that they're not sleeping, they're not recovering. And that what happens in your brain at night is so critical for brain health and for flushing out the toxins of the day. And it's like a bath for your brain every night. And if you're not cycling through all these different sleep stages, your brain is basically holding on to these toxic metabolites through the next day and the next day and the next day. And that's, it's not healthy, but it's the easy button and it's socially acceptable and it's out
I love
there.
sitting down and having a drink with a friend. I mean, that's why we have all this alcohol in
it's people enjoy it. I enjoy it. Yeah.
I do too. But boy, like I have a Garmin watch and it tracks all that stuff and I wear it when I sleep and God, do I notice the difference.
Yeah. And that's where you got to pick your battles. It's like for people who are struggling and that is something that they're having a really hard time letting go of or adjusting, I say start making positive change. Like don't overwhelm yourself, right? Like don't try to like be the perfect picture of health overnight. Start with implementing changes in your diet. Start by adding nature. Over time you can find room as you start to feel better. You'll build a better capacity to make better choices. But when you're swimming in this soup of inflammation and you
or
feel
just
like
starting
shit,
is hard. Like just fucking starting is like,
it
I'll do
is.
it tomorrow. Or it's the weekend. I'll do it Monday. It's like, you can't do that. It's like, and you got to be consistent with it too for it to.
That's why you got to start
actually work.
small. Otherwise, if you try to maintain consistency with 100 different things, you're going to feel bad about yourself and you're going to quit and you're just like, well, I couldn't do it and I'm a failure. And it's like, that's not helpful for this path of health.
No.
Like you got to like give yourself little wins,
Yeah.
So the
when
alcohol thing is
it comes
tough.
to sleep, like say you've had a sleep deprived night, I commonly find this just because I'm on the go. I'm at a public appearance or whatever. I'm in here late and then still got to, I'm down to that 4-hour window of sleep or maybe that's the only time I have to get out and work out. Like, what do you, as far as like napping and that sort of thing, like one of my favorite things to do, is to get in a deprivation tank, but I don't have access to one here. Like I've done it in California a few times, but I kind of adopted like, and I have a really hard time falling asleep too.
Yeah.
So like to take a nap is like near impossible for me, especially to lay down in the middle of the day, just not going to happen. So I've been doing the NSR deep rest, yoga nidra or that sort of stuff. Another thing that I picked up from Huberman, and it makes a big difference. Like, if I'm just feeling depleted and I was like, okay, I need 20 minutes, it's kind of a crazy deal. how much does that help, or does that help
Yeah, it depends on the person.
on some of that sleep stuff? Because some people can't. I mean, if you have a normal job and a normal life and you have kids,
you can't
good
nap.
luck getting fucking 8 hours of sleep a night.
And you can't nap during the day either,
Right.
oftentimes. But yeah, it depends on the person. So like if you're really struggling to get the sleep you want at night, like because you have to get up too early or, you've got responsibilities, you stay up late and can't go to bed early enough or just have trouble sleeping. I mean, anything you can do to kind of get a little bit of rest throughout the day. So whether it's sitting on a park bench with your eyes closed, just breathing, or if you can do some eye rest or yoga nidra for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or for people who
That stuff is really, it's weird as shit to me. Like,
It is
because I'm
weird.
not like a guy to do it.
Yeah.
And you got to find the right like guide, I guess, in
voice,
it. Yeah.
yeah.
Because that was a learning experience for me. Because I was like,
Yeah.
at first it was like a chick doing it, but she had this super hot voice. So I was like, this is counterproductive because this is just making me think about other things.
Yeah.
So then I went to the exact opposite, which was a male. And I was like, I can't listen to this
No.
motherfucker.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just like, so you got to find the right guide. But man, it is crazy. Like you really, I don't know, maybe it's something that I get out of it that other people don't. But like I've genuinely 20 minutes and I feel like, damn, I'm ready to go again. Like,
Totally.
what are we doing?
Yeah. And I know people who hate it. So, I mean, it just
Yeah.
depends, there are people.
I really had to conform. Like,
Yeah.
I had to swallow some
You were
pride.
willing to give it a solid go.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for some people that napping is an option and that does work for them, but you do have to keep it timed probably to an hour or less. I mean, I'd say 20, 30 minutes is even better.
Yeah, don't go
because
over like
you
you're
can't.
counterproductive then.
No,
Yeah.
and then you're gonna have problems going to sleep at night, and especially don't do these things later in the day. I mean, unless you're gonna be up super late. I would say the rest stuff should all happen before 3 p.m. and don't have extra caffeine past that time either, just to like stretch it out, and keep the energy up. Just try to go to bed early and or go to bed at your normal time, and you'll be really tired that night.
Right.
Not a bad thing. But it's challenging because a lot of people feel like they have to be energetic throughout the whole wake period of their day. So they'll be popping monsters and taking nicotine and all these things
shit.
until like dinner time.
Me included.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I have friends who can't sleep, and I'm like, how many of these Zins did you pop right before dinner, and how much Red Bull are you drinking
Right.
right now? And I'm like, man, you're not. Nobody's gonna sleep.
The brain is just constantly
Yeah.
being fed.
Yeah, it's just not going to happen. I don't care how used to it you
Right.
are. Your physiology is your physiology.
Yeah. Caffeine's a big one.
Yeah.
And the way that you use caffeine, I think too, like what times a day and that sort of thing have been game changer for me. We are burning through time here.
Okay.
One of the things that I want to ask you about, because I'm dealing with it personally, and I know so many people that deal with it, and I don't know if this is something that you can answer, but the differences between dementia and Alzheimer's, and maybe some things that might help with that, even if it's early onset. Like I have some family members that have early onset
Okay.
Alzheimer's and stuff like that. So is there anything
Yeah.
that you can implement or do to help people in that situation, whether it's through nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals, therapy, exercise?
Yeah, it's kind of all the same stuff we were talking about before with regard to
Because it
brain
kind of
health.
correlates with TBI, right? A little bit, or not,
It can, yeah.
or it
This-
has a lot of the same symptoms, I guess I should say, right?
There's the underlying pathophysiology is different.
Okay.
But the ways that you can help and support the brain are similar. So the things that improve cognitive function, there's a molecule called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that helps promote and maintain synapse health, like where your neurons connect, and helps promote neurogenesis in this part of your brain called the hippocampus, which is really important for memory. So a lot of times when people are suffering with memory issues, the hippocampus is implicated. So cardiovascular activity helps boost that molecule in your brain. That's going to benefit anybody from who has a TBI to Alzheimer's and forms of dementia. So that cardiovascular activity is really important. These same supplements that we were talking about before that it may be anti-inflammatory or promote brain health, like fish oil, for example, can be beneficial. I think the other thing is with regard to some of these neurodevelopmental or neurodegenerative conditions, I think anything that's going to help challenge the brain and promote learning and critical thinking are always going to be beneficial. So trying to train the brain and keep it sharp as best you can through all of that is also really important. So whether you have
Once
TBI,
it starts, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go, no, you're good.
Once it starts to onset, is there any reversal to gain anything back? Or are you just lost at that point and trying to maintain? Or is it?
I think, I'm not an expert in Alzheimer's, but I would say from what I understand of what we know of the research and the clinical studies so far is that you can do a lot to sort of maintain where you're at. And I don't know of anything reversing what's happening yet. Mm-hmm. Hopefully we'll get there one day where we're able to reverse the processes that have been in place to kind of cause the condition. But right now, I do know that these are all things that can kind of help slow the progression. And there are some pharmaceuticals. I'm not sure what the latest is in the pharma world for Alzheimer's meds, but I do know that there's been a lot of research on trying to look at different pharmaceuticals that can help kind of halt the progression and buy people more time, just like there is for like Parkinson's disease, where you can take some medication. It's not gonna reverse the condition, but it's gonna slow the progression and buy somebody a lot more time. And so that's something else that I think is out there in the clinical space. I'm just not aware of, what the latest is in those areas.
I guess one thing that I've noticed is it's hard getting the diagnosis because not everybody has access to a neurologist or to a brain scan, or insurances don't cover it. Mm-hmm. I guess if we could just break down, like, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, and like, I guess, what are some of the symptoms or cues to kind of diagnose what is what? Mm-hmm. And is there any point to figuring out the difference? I mean,
so Alzheimer's is a very specific pathophysiology that involves the deposition of different proteins, beta amyloid and tau proteins in the brain that can cause dysfunction and the ability, like the lack of the ability of the neurons to function properly. And so you have this degenerative process that begins to happen in the brain as a result of these specific proteins that are being built up and deposited. Dementia can happen from a lot of different causes. So, for example, one form of dementia that we now know as what people call CTE was dementia pugilistica, which is
that's what I have.
Which is the punch drunk syndrome of boxers that boxers used to show, that NFL players also just exhibited, and we're starting to see that as the pathophysiology is different than Alzheimer's. So there's different things happening at a molecular level in the brain, but it's leading to dysfunction in the ability of the neurons to communicate properly, and then atrophy, just like in Alzheimer's, but for different reasons. And so you'll see the pattern will look different. The molecules are different, but the symptoms start to show up in similar ways, where you do have like memory issue is like a very clear example of something that's common in both forms of Alzheimer's and different forms of dementia. So memory issues can be a big one. But again,
is dementia, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
This is a stupid question.
No,
probably.
It's not stupid.
Is dementia thinking it's almost like a hallucination, like something is happening that probably didn't happen?
That can be, you can
in
have
your brain, and then Alzheimer's is memory, like whether it's short term or long term, or is it?
I would say that there's a lot more symptoms that are related to both. You can have hallucinations in forms of dementia, almost like where you think you're hearing things.
Somebody stole my Bible, or
gummy
bears, or
stuff
whatever.
like that. Yeah, absolutely. So you can have that. You can have some of that in Alzheimer's disease as well, as in the later stages of progression. So it kind of depends on how far along the progression is and what's going on for an individual. But it is tricky. To your point, it's really difficult to diagnose. And if someone's not paying attention, usually what I say is like your loved ones are probably going to be the ones to start bringing it up and ask the question of, because especially for the individual, like that's a scary thing to confront for yourself. So you're probably not going to want to most people are probably not going to want to like
Yeah.
ask, am I really dealing with this? But if your loved ones are noticing and saying, I'm really worried about you, will you please go check? And, let's go talk to the doctor together. That's something where sometimes you can catch it earlier. But for a lot of individuals themselves, they're not going to necessarily notice or want to know. And I'm speaking about that with like my own family members. And
Yeah, the personal case that I'm dealing with is my grandfather, he's really like my father figure. He was a first responder, a fireman of like 30 some years,
Yeah.
and just a badass individual. Like any man would aspire to be like him, just a real gentleman, all that sort of stuff. And he'll remember stuff from like his firefighting days or his firefighter buddies, but he won't remember like, hey, we're going to the grocery store right now.
Yeah.
Or it's like these
Right.
little short-term things, or I can't remember so-and-so's name or, like stuff like that. And he's cognitive enough that he's catching it, but then he starts to go into this like remorse or kind of that like operator syndrome where it's like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I can't remember this. Like, then he starts feeling guilty about it, right?
And that
it's
makes
like
it worse.
The
'cause-
guilt is even worse
Yeah.
than. So yeah, I'm kind of looking for something to like, I just see it depleting him. And like, he's always been the cornerstone of the family and this rock solid guy and what could protect and save anybody's life. Like that sort of mentality, his whole life, and has really prided himself on being that sort of person. And now it's like, God, I can't do anything. I can't even remember to write a check to pay the electric bill or whatever, right? So like those sort of things are hard to watch somebody like
really
that
hard.
struggle.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And that, I think that it's possible that there's some clinical trials out there that have, again, these are experimental drugs, so it's also risk. But there are people working on that and trying to develop new therapeutics that could potentially help. And I'm not sure of what's going on, but that could be something to look into at least of what is out there, and are there any new trials going on with different things that could be useful. And usually for those, you either get paid to be in it or it's completely free. So
Right.
rather than paying for these really expensive treatments, you might be able to get into a trial for free or something like that. So
Okay.
clinical trials can be worth looking into for that, but it's going to be, it's challenging.
It's a rough
really,
road.
It's a rough
hard
road
to
no
watch,
matter how.
So it's like,
yeah, I know.
and I think everybody deals with it too. It's
Yeah,
like
it's
one of those
common. It's very
things,
common.
like it's just a common thing. Like I know so many people that have dealt with it with their family members. And then, back to the CTE thing, I'm sure that he's had some head trauma. Like
Yeah.
he had an entire roof of like a Kmart or something collapse on him in a fire. And
wow.
like lucky he lived, and like
Dang.
just all kinds of
Well, and
crazy stuff.
breathing toxic air,
Yeah,
that
there's
can
so
definitely
many different
cause
things.
some
And back
issues.
when he was firefighting, it was a different time, right?
Probably smoking cigarettes in the middle of a fire.
Exactly. They were definitely why they were hunting. It was funny. We brought up in a podcast the other day is like, he's the guy that's like, why do you need all that like Sitka camo? And that? He's like, we used to hunt in red flannels, and like, you don't need your wind meter. That's what Marlboros were for, Like,
That's awesome.
yeah,
I love
so
it.
funny, man.
Different
Such an
breed.
old school mentality,
love
And they're right. It's like, you don't have to have all that sort of shit
Yeah.
to do it. It's like a luxury,
Yeah, it's so true.
So I got about 30 more minutes with you. And one of the things that I have a long list here, and we barely touched on any of it. And I normally don't make notes. But I think one thing that has gotten very popular, and I'm a user myself, and I don't know that I'm doing it right. And there's so many people in the community, and it's something that's kind of new. And now it's being publicly accepted, whether it's through Congress and different podcasts and therapy, are psychedelic therapies, whether it's DMT, psilocybin. There's so many different. Ibogaine is another one, right?
Yep.
There's so many different treatments. Like guys are going across the border to get it now. What? I guess my biggest thing is like, I'm all about it, and I'm all about it if it helps people. Another thing that I deal with in my family is some mental illness, like psychosis, and like those sort of things have affected some family members.
Yeah.
So I'm always skeptical about not that I'm looking at it for myself, but I think a lot of people, I think that that's something that's not talked about a lot, to the point where I've seen like marijuana use of edibles like drive somebody into almost like an episode of a psychosis or one of these mental illnesses, right? And you don't ever want to escalate that. And I think it's something that's never really talked about. What do you kind of know about that? And like people that are maybe microdosing, whether it's THC or psilocybin or using it for therapy and that sort of thing.
Well,
I just always worry about it being counterproductive.
Yeah, I think it's really healthy to be cautious when it comes to this stuff. I mean, they aren't fish oil,
Right.
you know? It's not like you can pop a bunch of them and like, you know, there's no risks here.
Don't take 3 times
Don't
the dose,
take
the recommended dose. Well, that's part of the problem is you don't know what the recommended dose is.
We don't, right?
And without it being legalized,
right.
It's
like a choose your own adventure thing. To
it is.
Some extent.
Where are you getting it, first off, right?
Yeah.
And even now, like, the one reason that I don't use marijuana now at all is like when I was growing up, when I was smoking it as a kid and like picking seeds out of it, it was like you were barely high. Now it's like
So
I can't even get off the couch, and I'm using the smallest dose of THC, but it's just like it's been genetically modified to be this thing that levels you now, and sends you into a state of I don't like feeling paranoid. I like feeling in control.
This is counterproductive.
Yeah. So it's like I just don't like that feeling. So I'd much rather be capable, I guess. Like I don't ever need to check out like that, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I'm with you. I feel the same way about that. Had a couple of instances myself.
Not that I'll never use it again, but it's just like I don't know. For me, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, one of the things that you brought up is really relevant to the psychedelic space, and that's that we discovered these by trying to find something that could mimic like schizophrenia or psychosis to study it. And so that's how psychedelic research began. It was like, how do we mimic what's going on in a person's brain during psychosis so we can study it?
For like a 24-hour period.
Yeah.
This is why it's also good to be in a safe environment if you are going to use any of these things and around good people.
Well, and so that was kind of how the research began. And then there was this accidental ingestion of one of the compounds that was being derived from some of these like fungi and different things. And that was LSD. And that famous story of Hoffman riding his bike high home, you know, from the lab. And
Can you tell me?
It was I'm probably going to get it wrong, but generally speaking, this chemist, Albert Hoffman, was the one who was responsible for kind of deriving some of these compounds. They were testing all these different compounds and generating these compounds from I think it was ergot, but I could be wrong. I can't remember exactly what they were using to kind of derive these compounds. And they had a whole bunch of them, but I think it was LSD 25 was the original LSD.
Which people don't know, if you touch that shit, sometimes it can.
So he was synthesizing this stuff, and I guess he had accidentally ingested somehow, or I don't remember how the contact happened for him, but he was riding his bike home from the lab and had the most incredible trip ever and was just like, oh my gosh, like this is something.
The best bike ride ever.
Yeah. So that's when it was like, well, okay, like why does this compound induce this euphoric, interesting state? And so then it kind of, LSD became sort of that original. I think that people in the psychedelic community celebrate Bicycle Day as the day that that he rode his bike home.
That's hilarious. Next thing you know, you're on tour with the Grateful Dead.
Yeah, but other compounds like psilocybin, for example, was used in ceremonies in Central America and Mexico for a long time. You have another compound, or I guess multiple compounds in one, ayahuasca, which is used sacramentally in tribal communities in the Amazon. You have iboga, the shrub in Africa that was used in ceremonies in places in Africa. So it's not just that this started from, research into psychosis. There were communities all over the world using locally derived compounds from plants and shrubs and fungi to induce different spiritual states and have sort of a ceremony or sacrament around this experience. And it was meant to be this tribal thing. Often healing was involved. Sometimes it was healing of a community or an individual or preparation even for hunting. And there's lots of different reasons why people were using these things. I think as Westerners, our scientific minds are really curious around this stuff. And of course, we want to know
but it was a freaking party, right? It was a social thing,
and
right?
then it became, the psychedelic movement kind of became, and then, there's obviously governmental testing. And, there's a whole slew of things around it. But what we do know now, so luckily the research has picked up again after the whole shutdown of the war on drugs and sort of putting the kibosh on any research. More recent research has kicked up here in the States, but also in other countries. Like Brazil's done a really good job. The researchers there who have looked into ayahuasca and done clinical trials on individuals with trauma, PTSD specifically, or generalized trauma, or people who have suffered from depression or anxiety disorders. People are looking at individuals with these conditions and asking the question, we have these compounds and we're seeing anecdotally from what we know of what's happening in tribal communities or people who have taken it, these really positive changes and benefits. What is happening and why and what's going on? And so now we're seeing this huge bloom of clinical trials being done with these substances, which I think is really, really powerful, because if we can do something like take something like psilocybin in a controlled setting to overcome alcohol addiction, I mean, that's incredible. There's nothing on the planet that will do that. So if psilocybin is the thing that can do that for people, of course we should explore that.
Absolutely.
So there's lots of stuff like that that's coming out that's really beneficial, but there is this dark side of it, which is a lot of times people, especially Westerners, you don't always see this in other nations, but here in the States, we have this mentality of if some is good, more is better. And, and I want to chase,
down to food. I mean,
yes. And we chase comfort and the feel good pleasure feelings. We don't do well with discomfort here, whereas a lot of other places people can kind of deal with that better. It's just sort of a known thing that we all go through.
I think some of it's genetic too, because we've had it so good for so long. You don't realize until you walk into a third world country and see how people are living there on the masses, how good we have it. It makes you appreciate home, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you go to the poorest places and they're the most joyful people you've ever met.
Oh, some of the happiest. Like one of the craziest experiences that I've ever had was sober on a beach outside of Brazil or outside of Rio on a surf trip. And I was lucky enough to go with this local dude that I made friends with. And he took me to a surf beach where these kids were riding like pieces of wood, broken surfboards. They had literally nothing.
Yeah.
They were living in like grass, palm, like huts, no clothes really at all. And just eating fish, living off the land, and the happiest people to like take you in, like hospitable, like genuine, like I couldn't even, they were speaking like a native Portuguese, like it was Portuguese, but it wasn't like, so I couldn't understand even a little bit of Portuguese, but like just amazing experience.
Yeah.
And they literally have nothing. Like they couldn't go to the grocery store and buy a bottle of water.
Right. Yeah.
They don't have currency. Like their currency is here, food
what you
or
can
whatever.
do for each other.
Right. Yeah.
I love that. And that's,
or human emotion, really. Like, so it's like, that opened my eyes so much to like, fuck, man, you really don't need anything when it comes down to it. Like,
I know. And that's,
what you need is love.
I mean, truly, yeah. It's a simple life and a lot of love and like being real humans with each other, and like we've gotten so far from that here in our country, and everybody wants to be completely comfortable all the time, whether it's emotionally or physically or, whatever. And so we don't often go to these places where we can sit with the discomfort of life, whether it, especially emotionally. Sometimes we're really good at the physical part, but that plays into how we deal with something like psychedelics, where what I've seen, especially in all the communities, but I see it a lot in the veteran community because I'm just part of that space. And a lot of times people will feel better when they take something like that for a period of time. And then when things don't feel good again, they'll be like, oh, I just need to go do another ceremony. I'm going to go do this again. And it's like, hey, maybe life's kind of hard right now. And like, it is a little shitty. And maybe, there's some things that you need to experience because you need the information to make a change or learn something from what you're going through. If you just every time you're having an off day or you can't think, like people use it for creativity and cognition. It's like, well, I can't think straight. I must need to do more. It's like, no, you're having a day, man. You're a normal human and you're not always going to be like on all the time. You know?
Especially with creatives because like
that's their currency.
Stephen Pressfield has been a godsend to me in his writing and what he's written as far as creating art. And his kind of his self-help for the artist or like writer or whatever. And it applies to anybody, whether they're, crocheting scarves or whatever, right? Like it will apply to whatever you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's a lot of suck that happens with it. There's a ton, right? There's
That's
a ton
life.
of,
And we've somehow twisted this ideal image of life into constant performance, constant joy. And the social media thing doesn't help either because that's all you see.
It's like, just instant gratification, I think, right?
Yeah. And so we can sometimes take a good thing like psychedelics or anything and something that is a tool and is a good thing and turn it into something that actually causes more harm or causes us to do the opposite of growth and healing. And, so it's a challenging space in general, but I think it speaks more to the underlying culture that we have here rather than the medicines themselves.
Yeah, you have to be careful with it. I mean, I microdose psilocybin on occasion. Well, mostly once a week, but there's certain times that I do it and I know when I want to take it and what state of mind I want to be in. Like I try to do everything in my life now with a purpose. It doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah.
But like if you're not doing it with a purpose, if you're just doing it to have a good, I think it's counterproductive.
Absolutely.
I really do. Okay, because we're coming up on time, I want to make sure that we get you out of here in time. We're going to wrap this up, but this has been awesome. I would love to have you back.
I loved it.
I thought it would be really cool to sit down with you and maybe one of our mutual friends at some point.
Totally.
Or I have a ton of fighters that have dealt with CTE or head trauma and stuff like that. That I'm sure would love a little bit of your time, and it'd be cool to do it in here so I can learn too, and an audience could learn. So I'd love to have you back.
Absolutely.
Whenever you're available. You always have a seat here.
I'll be here almost every day in the summer mountain biking.
Let's go. You can just drop in here. We can do 30-minute chunks at a time, whatever. I'll go mountain biking with you. Actually, I won't. I won't be able to keep up. You probably outride me for sure.
I don't know about that.
But do you shoot a bow or anything? Or?
I did. Well, so I have one, and I'm getting. Jeremiah just asked me about this because we were shooting this weekend with our friends at Thin Air Precision down in Moffett. And I saw, he didn't know I was going to be there. And so he got out of his truck and I was like, hey, and I haven't seen him in forever because I've been gone. And he was like, what the fuck? So we had a blast hanging out. And he was asking about that. He's like, hey, you shooting rifle, but I thought you had a bow. I was like, I do, but I'm new to hunting for the most part. And so there was such a learning curve for me to learn everything. I figured I would stick with rifle for a while and get good at that. And then pick up the bow. So this is
you don't even have to hunt with the bow. Like I find therapy in that. That is my meditation.
Yeah.
But anyways, long story short, I have amazing access to the best archery range in the nation,
awesome.
in my opinion.
Amazing.
So we should go do that
Let's
sometime.
do that.
That's really fun.
Let's do that.
It's therapeutic. It's a great way to bond.
Heck yeah.
It's a really cool spot. But anyways, besides all that, what do you got? Excuse me. What do you have coming up? Is there anything that you want to plug before we get you out of here and wrap this up?
There's one thing in particular that's probably the most relevant to the discussion we're having today around brain injury. So my military medical company, Karuna Medical, my business partner and I founded in 2019. We're currently working on developing a therapeutic for brain injury. And it's derived from bacteria in soil. So it is very much in alignment with kind of the things we've been talking about. And it has an immune response that is anti-inflammatory when taken. We're trying to develop that currently. I've applied for some grants through the NIH and hopefully through the DoD soon to get funding around that. But we're going to form a company and probably start fundraising in the near future. And it's a Colorado company, so I've got lots of friends. I have lots of friends here, some who are NHL players, UFC fighters, and so I want to try to get anybody who's interested in this idea to help us, like, with that battle cry to try to get the word out to see if we can get some support.
Well,
to
you
do
got
some,
us,
some
so
yeah. We need to do some pilot testing on animals first, but we're going to develop this and then run clinical trials eventually. So,
rad.
Hopefully, it's something that'll help all of us because we all need it.
That's super cool.
Yeah.
If people wanted to reach out to you do you take any patients on referrals, or how does that work?
I do. Yeah, I work with folks. I always have initial calls just to make sure it's a good fit and I can help them with something. And sometimes it's just an initial call to like give them some resources because that's all they need. And sometimes people just want to have an ongoing touch point with certain things that they're working on. But yeah, man, if people want to reach out for whatever, for information, to work with me, to ask questions, like I always try to make myself available, and I'll be completely honest when I don't have the bandwidth for things. So I don't kind of like leave people hanging. But yeah, people are more than welcome to reach out. They can do it on Instagram. They can shoot me an email, whatever they're comfortable with for that.
What's the Instagram handle? You want to pull that up real quick, Tyler? So
it's Doc Pate.
Doc Pate.
DOCPATE.
All right. Yep. Awesome. Great follow too. By the way, I love seeing all the badass shit that you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, and then if people want to shoot me an email, it's docpate@proton.me.
Okay.
Super
We'll put there'll be links to do you have a website or anything, or?
I need to. I don't. Yeah.
We'll put links to your Instagram in there.
Okay.
And then also, do you have any sort of crowdfunding set up for
Not yet. Not yet. We're probably going to do.
We'll just come back on when you do.
soon.
We'll put a live link in there too. So if you're listening to this, open the show notes, give Doc Pate a follow, and stay tuned here at the Mountainside. And we definitely want to have you back. This has been awesome.
Heck yeah.
Let's get you out of here though, so you can go take care of your day. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you
making
so much.
time to come up here.
Absolutely.
It's awesome that you're right down the road
I know.
too. So let's go. But yeah, you're welcome back anytime. So
cool.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for
Appreciate you.
having me. Appreciate it.
Enjoyed it. Thanks for listening to the Mountainside Podcast. If you haven't had a chance to do this already, please take a moment, follow, like, subscribe, or rate on whatever platform you catch the Mountainside Podcast at. If you'd like some more information on upcoming episodes, safety tips, access to all of our affiliates, and all the badass discounts that we get here at the Mountainside Podcast, check out themountainsidepodcast.com.